In every era, there have always been beauty standards and people have always tried to follow them. In this video, you'll learn about deadly fashion trends from the past. Why did people romanticize tuberculosis and take pride in their illness? How did many women die because of their dresses and how did beauty standards change? Fashion has not always gone hand in hand with comfort and freedom of movement. Of course, it's very hard for us to imagine this now because almost all of our clothing is as comfortable as possible. But for many centuries, women had to sacrifice not only comfort, but also their health, and sometimes even their lives, in order to meet fashionable ideals of beauty. Very often, the corset serves as an example of such sacrifices for the sake of beauty. A symbol of refinement and femininity, for a very long time it caused harm to women's health. Deformation of the rib cage, displacement of internal organs, breathing problems. This is just a small list of all the issues the corset caused. Girls were laced into corsets from an early age. As we can see in Velázquez's painting Las Meninas, where a 5-year-old girl is depicted in a rigid corset. It was only at the beginning of the 20th century that doctors and public figures were able to make society aware of the dangers of corsets, and this fashion began to fade. The second half of the 19th century was marked by a series of tragic incidents involving the deaths of young women. In 1861, Fanny Longfellow, the wife of the American poet and translator, caught fire in her own home after her dress brushed against a candle wick on the table. Fanny herself died, and her husband, who tried to save her, was forced to wear his famous beard for the rest of his life to cover the burns on his face. In 1867, 18-year-old Archduchess Mathilde of Austria, frightened by her father's arrival, hid her cigarette behind her back. A spark instantly set her dress on fire, and she died in agony. In the year 1871, the renowned and celebrated author Oscar Wilde's two stepsisters, who were quite young at the time, attended a festive and lively Halloween party, a memorable event indeed. One of them caught her dress on the fireplace while dancing. The other tried to help her sister. Both died from their burns a few days after the tragedy. The older of the two was only 24 years old, and these are just the high-profile cases that all the newspapers love to report. How many such incidents have happened that we don't even know about? Light, airy fabrics like tulle and tarlatan would instantly ignite from the slightest spark. Open flames from fireplaces and cigarette soul of this turned the home into a real trap for beauties. Particularly dangerous were the voluminous skirts with crinolines, which not only caught fire easily, but also acted like real chimneys, intensifying the flames. That is why so many of the victims were ballerinas, who were forced to dance dangerously close to open flames. Coco Chanel was one of the first to draw attention to the fire hazard posed by women's clothing. By the way, it was Chanel who also redesigned women's sportswear. What about an active lifestyle? Just not for women. Until the early 20th century, women participating in sports was considered more of an exception. And even such remarkable figures as Elizabeth of Bavaria, who was famous for her love of an active lifestyle, could not change these entrenched traditions. The fashionable silhouettes of that time, with their voluminous skirts and tightly laced corsets at the waist, simply made any movement impossible, or at least problematic. At the same time, the myth of women's weakness began to develop. Supposedly, no woman was capable of engaging in active sports. And of course, this myth only further increased the popularity of such fashionable silhouettes. Why would people who work on dresses bother making comfortable clothing if women supposedly aren't capable of any kind of sport at all? With the end of the crinoline era, the problem of restricted mobility did not disappear. At the beginning of the 20th century, hobble skirts came into fashion, fitting tightly around the legs, below the knees, and making it difficult to walk freely. The trend for such skirts was set by actress Cécile Sorel, who was forced to pose for long periods in an uncomfortable position. But film is one thing and real life is another. The hobble garters that held the narrow skirt in place became a real curse for fashionistas. Women could barely move, were unable to sit down or stand up freely, and injuries from falls became increasingly common. Hobble skirts repeatedly became the cause of accidents. For example, at the Chantilly racetrack, a woman was unable to dodge a horse because her movements were so restricted. And in New York, a young woman drowned because she was unable to get past a sluice gate in her narrow skirt. Yes, with today's fashion and such a developed beauty industry, it's certainly very hard for us to imagine something like that happening in real life. But it really did happen. This is our history. And what remarkable women lived in those times. The 19th century was marked by a very strange and frightening phenomenon, the romanticization of tuberculosis. Just imagine, a disease that claimed the lives of millions began to be associated with a certain nobility, aristocracy, and sensuality. Of course, art and literature played a major role in this. Edgar Allan Poe, who himself lost his wife to tuberculosis, inadvertently contributed to the creation of a romantic aura around this disease in his works. Images of dying young beauties marked by the signs of consumption became classic and sparked an unhealthy fascination with the subject. Books would ask, what could be more beautiful than a dying young woman? A German researcher, in her works, notes the influence of such sentimentality and romanticism on the formation of a cult of frailty in the 19th century. Fragility, paleness, heightened emotionality, these are signs of the early stages of tuberculosis, but they came to be seen as attributes of a refined and sensitive nature, especially in women. As a result, people suffering from tuberculosis not only did not hide their illness, but sometimes even took pride in it, considering it a mark of distinction. The artist Maria Bashkirtseva, in her diaries, admired her consumptive appearance, unaware of the consequences her illness would bring. Well, of course, on the one hand, it's good that people always look for the positives, they're such optimists. Yes, well, if you've come down with tuberculosis, what can you do? At least they didn't get too upset about it. But of course, if we set the jokes aside, on the other hand, this kind of romanticizing of tuberculosis led to people simply not seeking medical help, not following preventive measures, and infecting others, and the misconception that tuberculosis was a noble disease greatly slowed the progress of medicine in this field. And it was only with the advancement of science that tuberculosis was defeated. Undoubtedly, beauty is different for everyone. Moreover, over time, standards of beauty change. At different times, people like different things, as this reflects the values and priorities of a given society. For example, during the Renaissance, beauty was inextricably linked to procreation. Paleolithic Venuses are the first works of art dedicated to women. Exaggerated forms, wide hips, sagging breasts, and a round belly are no accident. They symbolize health, fertility, and the ability to bear and nurture offspring, qualities essential for the survival of the tribe. But, for example, in the land of the pharaohs in ancient Egypt, there were completely different standards of beauty. The ideal Egyptian woman was a slender, tall brunette with delicate, even fragile facial features. Long legs, narrow hips, broad shoulders, and almost no breasts were the true traits of a beauty. Egyptian women paid special attention to makeup and hairstyles, Brightly outlined eyes with green paint, smooth and fresh skin whitened with special products, elegant wigs made from sheep's wool. All of this signified high status and refined taste. For example, in ancient Greece, physical beauty was seen as a gift from the gods and a reflection of inner harmony. A vivid example of this is an event associated with the courtesan Phryne. Her beauty was so perfect that she was even accused of blasphemy. The story of her trial, immortalized in Jerome's painting Phryne before the Areopagus, testifies to how highly the beautiful body was valued. The universal pursuit of beauty led to the emergence of mathematically precise canons of beauty. The sculptor Polykleitos, in his treatise Canon, described ideal proportions where each part of the body was harmoniously related to the others. The head is 1/7 of the height, the hand is 1/10, the foot is 1/6, and the center of the body is at the level of the navel. These proportions became the standard for artists and sculptors for many centuries. In the early Middle Ages, Christian asceticism replaced the pagan perception of beauty. Physical beauty was declared sinful, a temptation that distracts from the spiritual. A sickly pallor became fashionable, which women achieved by using lemon juice and even resorting to bloodletting. The face was supposed to appear elongated, so women would shave their foreheads, eyebrows, and eyelashes. In the Baroque and Rococo eras, there was generally no specific concrete standard of beauty. However, it can be noted that coquettishness, refinement, and sensuality came to the forefront. The thing is, the role models for many women were the royal mistresses. They loved luxury and flirtatiousness, a long swan-like neck accentuated by high hairstyles, a slender waist cinched by a corset, and deep necklines revealing pale skin teeth were the distinguishing features of beauties of this era. Yes, of course, the pursuit of beauty very often drives women to reckless actions. Even now, we sometimes see all sorts of strange news in the headline. For example, I remember someone injecting themselves with sunflower oil, supposedly like Botox in short. Things like this still happen today. So, what can we say about the past? In pre-revolutionary Russia, women had no pity for themselves at all and used poisonous substances. As early as the 16th century, Russian beauties were already using lead-based white makeup to give their skin an aristocratic pallor. Venetian white lead, which contained a large amount of lead, was especially popular, despite the fact that its use led to severe poisoning lead colic. But in addition to white lead, blush made from mercury minerals and toxic mercury chloride was also used. To make their gaze more expressive, ladies would put belladonna juice in their eyes, despite the risk of blindness and hallucinations. Eyebrows were accentuated with kohl, and for removing hair on the face and body, aggressive mixtures based on lime, sulfur, and arsenic were used. Recipes for such dangerous products could even be found in popular publications of that time. For example, in the book Lady's Toilette, published in 1791, in the 19th century, blue veins on a pale face became fashionable and they were drawn with aniline dyes which caused anemia. Freckles, on the other hand, were considered a flaw and were mercilessly removed using potassium cyanide, saltpeter, or that same dangerous mercury chloride. The history of pre-revolutionary Russian cosmetics and such hazardous fashions demonstrates just how dangerous blindly following fashion trends can be. Thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next video.